Hi guys, it's the end of the year and I decided to look at people we've lost in 2018. This video is going to get really sad, so just to make it start on a positive note. She's just chilling out in her chair. I'm doing this video a week before Christmas time because obviously just before Christmas, my house is going to be chaotic, full of relatives and all that stuff, so I won't get another chance. So if somebody really important dies in the next couple of days, and I don't mention in this video, that's why. So there is going to be lots of famous people that I won't mention simply because I don't know about them. Like, I'm not into sports, I'm not very good with musicians, so if I do this video and you go, hey, how come we didn't mention this huge person? He's one of the best footballers or whatever, because I don't know. But do let me know if there's somebody that you think is really important that I should have mentioned, because, I mean, I like Prince, so when I heard he died, I thought, no, that's a shame. But then I started researching him, and the more I researched him, the more I fell in love with him, and I thought, I don't just like him. He is absolutely, but he deserves his reputation of being one of the greatest musicians of all time. Actually, that's a good one to start with because we lost another incredible singer this year, Aretha Franklin. I didn't know a lot about Aretha Franklin. Usually when somebody famous dies, usually an actor, because I'm quite good at actors, I'll tell people, oh, this person died. They're like, who are they? It's like, he was in this movie. Because, oh, I didn't see that. I don't know who you're talking about. Which really annoys me. And this was the opposite. I was like, guys, Aretha Franklin died? And everyone in my wife's family were like, oh my god, I can't believe that. And they all said the same thing. She was the Queen of Soul. And I was like, oh, the woman who did Respect. Yeah, her. But I didn't realize that there's these songs everybody's heard of. Like Respect and You Gotta Think. And there's like 17 of them. And I didn't realize they were all the same person. I just thought it was lots of different soul singers. I didn't realize it was the same one. That probably happens a lot, because now that everyone's talking about Bohemian Rhapsody because of the movie, people didn't realize just how many songs that they did. Songs that everybody knows, but didn't realize it was them. And it's kind of like that with her. And much like Prince, I didn't know a lot about her live, and I'm researching it a lot now. I'm just finding out lots of great things she did, movies she appeared in, charity she gave money to. So yeah, Aretha Franklin, you will be missed. I think the first big one we lost this year has got to be Stephen Hawking. I actually read Stephen Hawking's biography when I was about 13 or 14. I'm not even going to pretend I understood it because, you know, quantum theory, like, what? And Stephen Hawking has admitted many times that he was wrong about his own theories, so if he doesn't understand it, what chance do I have? I'd say Carl Sagan was one of the first really famous astronomers in terms of he was on television and would, like, had a show and would talk to people and get kids interested in astronomy. But I think Stephen Hawking was the one that really tapped into it, where he made everyone fascinated. He just talked about, in a way, the most complicated things in the universe, literally, in a way that a child could understand it. The very first book I ever bought in my entire life, when I was 3, was about astronomy. I still have it to this day. It's not a book for a child. It's a book that's probably for someone who's 12 or 13, but I was so insistent I had to have it. My dad was like, okay, fine, you're not going to be able to read it. And I was just looking at these images of space and stars and pulsars and quasars, just obsessed trying to figure out what it was. Stephen Hawking helped fuel that in me, which to this day I'm still utterly fascinated about space. Something in space happens really every day. Yesterday a comet went by. Today it's found out that Saturn is losing one of its rings. See, before Stephen Hawking, only astronomers talked about stuff like that, but now everyone is fascinated by it. I said to myself, I'm not going to talk about his ALS because it's just kind of annoying that that's the only thing I remember. Oh, he's the guy who can't talk with a robot voice. But I do have to say that I did mention this in my Stephen Hawking video, but people think, you know, it's famous because of the movie, The Theory of Everything, that they only give him 2 years to live. I think he was 18, so he would have been dead when he was 20, and then he lived for another 50 plus years. And people think that's because technology's gotten so much better in the last 50 years. No, it isn't. He's just the only one ever to last 50 years. Nobody knows how he did that. Nobody understands how he survived that long. But it's incredible that he did, because he went on to inspire so many people, millions of people, with his theories and his perception of the world and reality in general. Which brings me right into the next person, another person who sadly passed away from ALS, Steven Hillenburg, the guy who created SpongeBob SquarePants. This is exactly what I mean. When he got diagnosed, he only died about 3 years later. He's only like, I don't know, like 50-something? Although he died way, way before his time, Steven Hillenburg not only went on to create the most successful Nickelodeon show ever, it actually makes more money than every other show Nickelodeon combined. That is just insane. That a guy made a little yellow sponge with a starfish, and that's the most successful thing on the entire channel. And you think, how? How does that make sense? Simple. Because Steven Hillenburg absolutely loves, adores marine life. He is a marine biologist. It's not just a silly cartoon. He puts a lot of things in it that are surprisingly accurate about marine biology because he knows everything about it. And because of this, thousands and thousands and thousands of children say that they became fascinated by marine biology, and they grew up and actually like took courses and done it thanks to this show. Another one we lost was R. Lee Ermey. I mean, just the greatest actor to ever live in terms of playing a drill sergeant. Every drill sergeant I've ever seen, it just copies him, but not as good. And the sad thing is, he was too good at that role. He was so good that he just played that role again and again and again. He played it in about 9 different films, including Toy Story and The Frighteners. He just appears for no reason as a drill sergeant ghost. And the reason why he was so good was because he was a drill sergeant in real life, which is probably the least surprising fact possible. But it's just amazing to see an actor who, after 30 years, no one has ever been able to play a character as good as him. That is a sign of true talent. George Bush is the most recent person to die at the moment of this video. He was seen as like a weedy president. His nickname was literally the Wimp. The first thing I ever heard about George Bush when I was a little kid was that he got sick, vomited everywhere in a Japanese party. And people make fun of him for that. It's like, oh no, how dare he become ill in public? What does that have to do with him as a president or as a human being? Nobody talks about his achievements. Like, a lot of presidents say that they're going to go and do this military operation in a foreign country, usually in the Middle East. They'll say, don't worry, it'll only take a couple of months, maybe a year or two. And obviously, as we know, from Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and the Iraq War, it just goes on, and Afghanistan, it just goes on and on for years and years and years, over a decade. And George Bush, the Gulf War, he got 30 nations to join him against Saddam Hussein. And everyone said, no way, it'll be absolute chaos. Tens of thousands of soldiers would die. And war is terrible, and there is death. But less than 300 American soldiers died. Less than 300 in a war. That's unheard of. And the entire thing was 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and it was finished. The efficiency of that operation just... You can't give Bush enough credit. Actually, one I nearly forgot, which I have to mention, is Reg E. Cathey. He's best known for being in House of Cards. He was also in Fantastic Four as Franklin Storm. And obviously, the Fantastic Four was terrible. In my opinion, it's the worst superhero film ever made. And I love Fantastic Four. I did say to myself, based off the trailer, because he's a narrator, I thought, if in this movie is tanks and it's terrible, which obviously it was, hopefully he should get a lot of work, a lot of exposure, because his voice, he just has one of the best voices ever. I mean, he's an older actor. I mean, he looks like, I don't know how old he is off the top of my head. He looks like he's like, I don't know, 55 or so, 60 or something like that. I'd assume he's been around for ages acting, and only now he's getting a reputation because of House of Cards. So it's kind of like, oh, cool. He's a late bloomer. He'll get loads of work, and then sadly he passed away. So that just sounds like, it's always horrible when any actor dies prematurely. It's like he was hanging around for decades, just waiting for his chance. He got it, and then he was gone like just a couple of years later. Vern Troyer. I mean, I don't actually know a lot about Vern Troyer, obviously, apart from Austin Powers. It's probably kind of annoying for him that that's the only thing he's known for, because his life was very difficult, because he has an extreme version of dwarfism. It's not like Peter Dinklage, like he's in constant pain all the time. He drank a lot to numb the pain, and obviously, sadly, he very tragically took his own life. Depression is never funny. Mental illness is never funny. Which brings me to my next person, a person who's very, very important to me. Margot Kidder, best known for playing Lois Lane in the 1978 film Superman, is one of the most famous people in terms of her bipolar. She just became a joke after that. They made fun of her in Family Guy and all sorts of shows. Oh, she's, crazy Margot Kidder. And they go, which one's Margot Kidder? Oh, she's the one who, like, shaved her head and they shot the CIA were after her and she went completely nuts. And that's what she's known for. That happens to a lot of people with mental illness. You had an episode which could have lasted a couple of minutes or hours or a few days, and you were judged for that episode where you were not in your senses for the rest of your life. That's what you're known for forever. Not the movies she made, or Superman, or the charity, or bringing awareness to bipolar or mental illness in general, just when you went nuts, which is just absolutely terrible. Nowadays, we're much, much better at understanding bipolar and it's a chemical imbalance rather than going crazy. And people like the recently passed Carrie Fisher and Catherine Zeta-Jones are amazing at spreading awareness. And I just feel like Margot Kidder, it happened in the 70s and 80s when it still wasn't understood. So I wish she got more help and people were more supportive rather than laughing at her, because I know plenty of people who have bipolar. Every one of them, without exception, say it is the worst thing that they've ever gone through in their life. Even if they lost somebody in their life, like their parents, whatever, it says, nope, bipolar is still worse. That is how unbearable it is. And she lived with it for decades and helped hundreds of thousands of people to understand that they are not alone. So I can't commend Margot Kidder enough. You knew this was coming. Margot Kidder is not the only comic book related person that we lost this year. We lost two others, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. The second Stan Lee died, everybody said to me, Jim, how come you haven't put up a video about Stan Lee commemorating him and all that? Everybody knows I love comics. I put up a video about comics every single week. So people were baffled. It's like, Jim, this is really out of character for you. And to be perfectly honest, I love comics so much that the first video I ever did about comics was about Stan Lee. I felt like I couldn't do a video about him because like there's nothing else I could really add except what I already said in that video. Like, I mean, what can you say? He was just a legend. He made it mainstream. Like, I see teenagers now who are like 12 or 13 with t-shirts of Rocket and Groot and Drax, and I know he didn't create those characters specifically. It's just nice that it's not a nerdy thing. It's just really cool that everyone loves comics, and he helped that more than pretty much anybody. However, there is something I need to say, which is probably the opposite of what people expect. People are going to think I'm going to say, oh, Stan Lee was the best thing ever. And no disrespect to Stan Lee. Stan Lee is amazing. Can't take that away from him. He did create 600 comic book characters. Even people who barely know anything about comics do know at least 100 of them. The Fantastic Four, Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, the X-Men, Magneto, Professor X. You've heard of these people. Even if you don't read comics, you know who these people are. So I can't take that away from Stan Lee. However, there is something I do have to say, which is very annoying. Steve Ditko also died. I just saw Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse yesterday, and at the very end of the movie, it says, rest in peace, Steve Ditko and Stan Lee. Steve Ditko created Spider-Man. He made the very first issue. And he created tons of characters like Dr. Octopus and Sandman and the Vulture and Chameleon and Green Goblin and so on and so on and so on. Unless you're into comics, most people don't know who Steve Ditko is. Most people don't know what he looked like, and people didn't even know he died until that appeared in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. I could hear people going, who's that? You see, a lot of people are talking about how since Stan Lee died, it's really horrible that people took advantage of him and they would steal his money and they would forge his signature to get money and his shares and profits and screw him over and sue him and like, oh, that's terrible. But you know what? Stan Lee is hands down the most successful person in history in comics. Practically every comic book writer has been screwed over in one way or the other. Steve Ditko created Spider-Man and he didn't get millions and millions of dollars. You know the guy who made Venom got $200. That's it. Stan Lee created Marvel Comics with Jack Kirby. How come nobody talks about him just as much as Stan Lee? Simple, because Jack died in the 1990s. There's hundreds of comic book writers that no one has heard of. Imagine if, when you talk about movies, the only one you talk about is Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro is responsible for everything. All the other actors don't matter. Just him. Every great movie is just because of Alfred Hitchcock. Every great book ever written is just because of J.K. Rowling. Not William Shakespeare or Christopher Marlowe or Sophocles or all the hundreds of other writers. It's just J.K. Rowling, and that's it. That's what it's like. Everyone thinks Stan Lee did everything. And again, 600 characters. Absolutely amazing. He didn't create Captain America. He didn't create Guardians of the Galaxy. How do you think all those writers feel that they got screwed over and no one remembers them? The guy who created Rocket Raccoon had brain damage, and he died in the hospital only a few years ago. One of the last things he ever did in his life was watch the movie, which made like $700 million. He didn't get any of that. What I'm trying to say is, it's horrible Stan Lee died, but he did have a great life. He was 96, 95. He accomplished more than most people do in 50 lifetimes. But Steve Ditko deserves to get his credit, as do many, many other writers. So one thing I am going to do in the new year is I'm going to do a video about comic book writers, just to show there's many, many more than you could ever imagine. But Stan Lee was a legend, was incredibly inspirational. And I do have to say one thing, is that at the end of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, when it says R.I.P. Stan Lee, it gives the quote that is my favorite Stan Lee quote of all time. Of the hundreds of inspirational quotes they could have chosen, they picked the one I love the most. That made me, and many, many people, that meant everything in that film. And that was the perfect ending. So whatever his cameo is in Avengers Endgame, I'm pretty sure it's going to make everybody bawling crying. And the last thing I have to say, a personal death, I've already mentioned it before in my video about Coco, is my dog, Lottie, passed away this year in May. My wife has repeatedly asked me, is getting these dogs the best present that anyone's ever got you? And I say, no. The best present anybody's ever gotten me is not the dogs, as in Slinky and Lottie and Rosie. It's the love of dogs. Because I never had a dog in my life. I never loved dogs. I would see them like, yeah, that's kind of cute. Nothing. Within a day, I was transformed. I was completely changed. I can never go through my life again without a dog. They are the best thing in life. I can't believe how many years I've lived and didn't have dogs in my life. How much I've been missing out. Everybody who knows me knows I hated dogs. Hated them. I got attacked by a dog when I was a kid and it just kind of traumatized me, so I just hated them. And you just, yeah, when Lottie passed away, it was unbearable. If you haven't experienced it, there is nothing in life like the love of a dog. I actually have researched it to check. Is it true what they say? Oh, nothing loves you more than a dog. I was like, there must be some random salamander or tadpole that loves you more. No, there is no animal in the entire animal kingdom that loves a human as much as a dog does. You physically cannot love a person, a thing, a child, your lover, your parents. You anatomically cannot love anything as much as your dog loves you. And that is such a special feeling. And it is heartbreaking that I had to say goodbye to Lottie. But you only care and you're that sad because you loved it so much. And there's a great quote I always loved: if not for the depths of grief, we could not measure the heights of joy. When people see how devastated I am, they're like, oh, it's terrible, Jim. I was like, no, it's okay, because you have to be sad. You can't just suck it up sometimes. It's okay to be sad, because it just shows that you cared about something that you loved. And that's it for me. And as I said, please, if there's anyone that's important to you that you think I should have mentioned, please say it in the comments. You might, like, hypothetically, you might say random American footballer or musician, and I'll research them when you say that, and I'll check and go, oh, this person is really interesting. They are really inspirational, and they did all this X, Y, and Z and all that stuff. As always, keep your suggestions coming. I hope you have an amazing New Year's. Thanks for watching. See you again.